Okay, this is going to be the first post for Analytical Astrology. And analytical, the word analysis means you get the idea of breaking things down into manageable bits and loosening what is there so you can understand it. And so this is the natal chart of Katie Holmes as it happens. And you look, I'm sure you're all familiar with a natal chart, but there's so much in it because we've got, let me put this down, we've got 10 planets and we've got 12 houses and we've got 12 signs of the zodiac around the outside of the chart, and we've got aspects. And so if you want to know about Katie herself, you look to 22 Leo. So you're looking at the sun over here in the 5th, and it's also the Aries decanate, so you're looking at Mars, and it happens to be the Aries duad if you want, and you've got degrees as well. So for somebody else, you would be looking over here. If you want to know about who Katie's going to marry, you take the 7th house cusp, 22 Aquarius. So we're looking at Saturn as the personal ruler of Aquarius over here. That's one part of it. We've got Uranus here, and it's the Libra decanate, so we get Venus as well. And Saturn at 13 Virgo is sextile Venus at 14 Scorpio. So there's all this going on. And that's just from the natal chart. And so I took like 20 seconds and I wrote this list because in a natal chart you can also deal with the north and the south node, the vertex, the east point, transits, solar returns, lunar returns, progressions, primary directions, eclipses, the prenatal eclipse, solar arcs, composite charts, relationship charts, meeting charts and marriage charts. And there's an awful lot more beyond that. So with a marriage chart that you may not be familiar with, when Katie thinks about Katie as herself, she's dealing with her natal chart. When she thinks about herself as Mrs. Tom Cruise, she's dealing with mainly the moon, but other planets as well in the chart for the time of marriage. Astrology and natal charts, it's complicated. It's complex. And so I think the point I want to make is it's very difficult to understand and read a natal chart correctly. It's easy enough to pick and choose and to look at an aspect between planets and start talking about it and build upon that. And that's what a lot of people do. And recently I had an email from this fellow who wanted to know, which was stronger because, he has Saturn up here about 27 Libra, and he has the moon in the first about 28 degrees of Capricorn. Okay, so there's a Saturn square the moon, and it's quite close, and he wanted to know which planet was stronger. But he also mentioned that with Saturn square the moon, this would mean that he would have distant parents. That was the expression he used. And I imagined him, okay, he's reading a book on Saturn or some kind of modern astrology book, and he comes across a statement about the moon square Saturn, you've got problems with the parents. And he reads distant parents, think that's me. Yeah, this is fantastic. Astrology works. And so maybe it works and maybe it doesn't, because this is assuming that Saturn square the moon is a difficult aspect, and it may or may not be. And so I wrote back and asked him if he'd looked at the cusp to get an idea of what was going on with him. And he said no, and I made a couple of suggestions about what he could do. And so he's got about 26 Sagittarius rising. And so the key word for Sagittarius is I understand. So he's in life to understand the self. Sagittarius ruled by Jupiter, which is up here about 26 Scorpio. And so how is he going to understand himself? Through trying to fulfill his hopes and aspirations, because that is the 11th house. Not through philosophy or foreign travel over here, or not through children over here, or not through other people over here, but through fulfilling his hopes and aspirations, if we take one basic meaning for the 11th house. So, at the same time, Jupiter's in Scorpio, and Scorpio is death and regeneration. So what he's going to find is that there's things that he wants to do, there's stuff he wants to do, and he's going to get to a certain point with it, with Scorpio. But then he's going to have to go back to the beginning again and make a new start. Because Scorpio is death and regeneration. You get to a certain point, then you've got to go back to the beginning again. And the trouble is, when you get to the good state, you can't stay there because you're forced to go back and begin again. So even when things are going well, you know, or you're forced to deal with the fact that shortly they won't be going so well. And this can be frustrating and annoying. And so, the rule of the 1st and the 11th, and the fact that it's in Scorpio, there will be disappointments. But the thing is, because Jupiter rules the ascendant, which is the self, when there are disappointments, when things don't work out the way he wants, he has the chance to more completely understand the self. So we get a reason for things going wrong. It's so he can understand himself. So, at the same time, 26 Scorpio, if you look at decanates, Scorpio, Pisces, Cancer, the significator of the self, Jupiter, is in the Cancer decanate of Scorpio. And Cancer, we know, is ruled by the moon, who represents the mother. And so we can see that his mother is going to be involved in him going through change so that he can understand the self. So we can see why the moon square Saturn, or the meaning of the moon square Saturn, he can see that it applies to him because the significator is in the Cancer decanate. And also, this is Katie again. Okay, so we can take Katie's chart, and this 7th house is going to describe who she marries. We take her natal chart and turn it upside down, and this will describe the husband. So this is Tom, and we've got Aquarius ruled by Saturn in the 9th. So this is somebody, oh no, it's over here in the 8th. But if we take the Venus ruling the decanate conjunct the midheaven, and Uranus ruling the ascendant conjunct the midheaven as well. So this is somebody who's going to be before the public. And we take Venus and Uranus, strange, unusual individual. And you think of Tom with his Scientology background and the controversy and the problems he's had because of it. So you get an idea of the kind of person that Kate is going to marry. And in the same way, this fellow's 10th house is the father. Okay? And the second from the 10th is the father's values. So in order to understand himself, he has to in some way learn the value sense of one of the parents. But he can't stay with it. It's going to go through changes. And so there's going to be disappointment and upset. And he's going to be forced to backtrack and to try again. And again, we've got a connection between the ruler of the self, which is Jupiter. We've got the Cancer decanate taking us to the moon. We've got the fact that it's the value sense of one of the parents, and the 10th being the father. And so we've got a kind of situation that is shown, okay, so let's say we've got a problem with the parents, or we've got dissatisfaction with what the parents do and what the parents teach. But it comes from the ruler of the first being in the Cancer decanate and in the 11th, and not particularly from the moon square Saturn. And so point number 2 is it's not good enough to begin with an aspect. Whereas if you begin with cusps and get an idea of what the cusps show, using a basic method like this, then you're in a much stronger position to understand what the chart shows, and you're not depending upon generalities that you get from aspects like the moon square Saturn that may or may not apply to the individual. Because for every person with the moon square Saturn who's had a bad relationship with the parents, there's somebody else who's had a good relationship. And the thing is, distant parents, who do you know who hasn't had problems with their parents one time or another? You know what I mean? It sounds right and it sounds correct, distant parents. But is it really telling us anything that is more than just a general statement that applies to basically everybody in the world? Because what does it mean, distant parents? I imagine that most of us, everybody listening to this, you can think of times when your parents didn't understand or appreciate you, and in that way they were distant. Maybe you get on better with them now, but you know, who hasn't a problem with their parents? So this is the end of part 1 of the first post of Analytical Astrology, and the idea is to have a transcript or some follow-up suggestions on what you can do to build on this kind of approach to reading natal charts correctly.